Stephen Gaghan. Welcome. Caution, Stephen.
Hello.
We are assuming that you all know who Stephen is, and that's why you're here. You all have bios, so we're just going to skip that part.
Yeah.
We're going to we're going to save that for your Kennedy Center honor, Stephen.
Father of Betsy and Gardner. I don't know if anyone knows that.
So you have 2 kids?
2 children,
How old are your kids?
6 and almost 8.
Oh.
Yes.
I feel like we're on The View.
I,
So, Winnie, we're just going to dive in. And Winnie had, first of all, we just want to say.
Surrounded.
Yeah, surrounded, exactly. Winnie and I, one of the things that we do, and in fact, the only thing we do to prepare for this class is we watch whatever the movie
I
is.
just realized I left my questions in my purse, and she has my purse, Sandy.
Oh, all right.
All right. But that's okay. Go ahead.
I could interview you guys, actually.
No, we're ready,
Awesome.
but
Dude, log rolling. You know how good writers these guys are? It's ridiculous.
I was going to say Winnie and I, who had both seen Traffic before and loved it, watched it again together, and we came up with the questions while we were watching it, but it really, really, really blew my mind because it had such a huge, sprawling, important subject matter, but was told on a totally emotional level. And yet I felt like I learned so much stuff about a topic that I really didn't know much about. So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, that's not a question, but that's unbelievably awesome. That's awesome. That made me
My work here is
awestruck.
done. Good night.
You drove all the way in from Malibu, just sit here for a little while.
I'm psyched. I'll talk as long as you guys will stay here. I
Well,
betcha.
let's start a little bit at the beginning, like we were starting to say back there. Talk a little bit about what you were starting to say to me in the doorway about, how did it come about? Yeah.
Okay. And by the way, I sometimes go on long, totally confusing flights of fancy. So anybody just any point just cut me off and say, "Shut up, Gag, and tell me something else," or whatever. We just back and forth because it's some's interesting, some probably is just so tedious. But Traffic is bizarre how it got started. Actually, and it is interesting because and I think for all writers it's interesting because it actually started weirdly with Michael Tolkien, who wrote the Player. And he's a wonderful writer. He's a great writer. And I was just starting out, and I'd come out here, and I'd seen The Player in '92. I arrived in LA in '93. Loved the movie. I also watched NYPD Blues, basically the only show I watched. And I had a lot of extracurricular proclivities in terms of drinking and whatnot. And I knew about David Milch, and I thought, that's what I like. A guy like that. He's
A degenerate.
high-functioning degenerate. I need to work for that man. And I'm a boy with a dream. I had a gleam in my eye. I'm like, I'm gonna go out and work for the only junkie executive producer in Hollywood. I'm gonna find him. Turned out there were maybe 2, but anyway. And it actually happened. It's like the weirdest thing, I wrote a script with David. I talked my way into it.
With David Milch?
Yeah, with David
And
Milch.
how did that happen?
Yeah.
We actually won. It was weird. We won the Emmy for the script, so it was like the craziest thing. Called "Where's Waldo?" It was this NYPD Blue script, but this goes way back. But I had gotten on a TV show. I worked on American Gothic, and actually, let me go back. I'll go back all the way to the beginning.
You were born in Louisville, Kentucky. I know that much.
No, I had written fiction, and I wrote a short story. I published a story when I was like 20 in the Iowa Review, and then I took about a 7-year victory lap on that one short story. I was just like,
Oh, man.
I was so fired up about myself all over the East Village around 1990, and I was just certain I was just about to happen in a big way, and nothing happened. And I wrote a Simpsons spec. And I knew one guy in Hollywood who worked at a mailroom. I sent it to him. He'd been a lawyer in Boston. He turned out he knew a guy who was the junior guy on Sam Simon's account, who was one of the original guys on The Simpsons, a junior agent. He read the script. It was 80 pages, 80 pages, and it was I had tabbed like to get anything in the middle, I would tab, every single thing was tabbed. I didn't know you could have a macro or a program, and so to make one edit on page like 9, you'd have to change everything all the way through. It was like, anyway, I had this 80-page spec. It gives it to Sam Simon, and Simon goes, I'll hire him. I love this, it's great. So I'm in New York, living on unemployment and the kindness of bartenders, and I come out here and I think, I've got this job on The Simpsons. They changed executive producers, and the guy, David Merkin, looked at my script apparently and said, it's not Simpsons-esque, and that was the end of my Simpsons career. Just
I have a David Merkin story I'll tell you later. He directed Romeo and Michelle. We don't speak.
Yeah, so it's a long.
Anyway, and that began this really hard period of time where I would give my material to people and they would tell me how great I was, and you're a genius, you're so talented. And it took me like 2.5 years to realize none of them had read it, not a single thing, and I just was getting lied to, and nothing was happening. And I got a break writing an hour TV, and I got put together with a guy named Michael Perry, and we wrote a couple specs. We got a job. We got hired by a guy named Robert Palm on American Gothic. The first break, we wrote a New York undercover for Bob Ward. Anyway, this is a long-winded I'm getting to traffic. These things are totally related, weirdly. So, and I'll tell you how. I had a friend who was working on a TV pilot with Michael Tolkien.
This is so like the movie, I just gotta say.
No, it's bizarre. It's so bizarre how these things happen. But I think it's worth talking about because you never know what fluky thing could happen. And I'm like, my friend Chris gives me an adult extension class in Proust for my birthday. Because I've never read Remembrance of Things Past. Actually, I've claimed to have read Remembrance of Things Past about 100 times. I've never gotten past like page 30. So I think I'll go take this class and that'll work out. So I go to one class because that's my level of follow through. And right after that, a friend of mine is complaining because Michael Tolkien has not written the HBO pilot that he promised them. And I said, I'm a TV pro now, man. I'm working on American Gothic. I'll do it under the table, pay me $35,000, put his name on it, I'll never say a word. She's like, I'm not sure that's ethical, but maybe I'll introduce you to Michael. So anyway, I'm sitting in Michael's backyard talking to Michael, and I start just blabbing about my love of Proust. Turns out he loves Proust and has actually read Proust. I have all these insights given to me by the extension teacher in my one class. I start sharing them. He's impressed. He says, I can't let you do this, but why don't you help me with it? You can maybe write this pilot with me. So we write this pilot together, Michael Perry, Michael Tolkien, and myself, about Bill Gates and Microsoft, and it's a satire. And it was a script called 20 Billion, and it started as a TV pilot, ended up becoming a feature. It was on like the Premier's like 10 best unmade screenplay list, and Tolkien taught me this unbelievably valuable lesson. And he taught me everything about screenwriting that was important that I knew, period, up to that point. And I've only learned a little bit past it. But I'd sit in his backyard, and he would just crack me up. And he would say the funniest things, the most insightful things, and I'd be like, that can't be in a movie. Are you kidding? They'd never make that. That's insane. And he would say, not only can that be in the movie, that's the only thing that'll be in the movie. And it slowly got me, just completely changed my mind what a movie could be about. I had this very conventional idea that things had to be about, they had to be in a genre, and they had to be this, and they had to be that. And he just didn't care. He was just an artist. It was like whatever amused him or what he was interested in, no matter how deep, no matter how profound, no matter how beautiful, all of which I would have said is not the province for commercial movie making. I didn't understand it. I had missed it. I'd missed it completely. I thought, I'm a literary writer. I worked at the Paris Review, and I've edited Nadine Gordimer, and now I'm out here to make some money. And I didn't understand what a great art form it was. And he just slowly showed me. And we would work out the story, we would break apart, we would each write scenes, we would come back together, and his scenes were always better. I mean, so much better, it was preposterous. And so for about 1.5 years we worked, and we worked on spec, and slowly my scenes got better, and one day, he was like, that's gonna be in the movie. And I mean, I'd probably written 100 scenes, at that point, and it's just like, I was like now 1 for 100, 1%. And so anyway, now to traffic.
But Stephen, he must have really seen something in you, because he wouldn't have just sat there with you if he didn't feel like scene 101 is going to be the one.
We amused him. Michael Perry knew a shitload about computers. He was like, used to hang out with these hackers downtown by the train station who would dial in through the public telephones and like hack. And so he had all this, we were writing about Bill Gates and Microsoft and Warren Buffett. And I had kind of this love of systems. I had a fascination with business. I actually have a business degree in financing new businesses. And so I had this weird.
Well, that's so much in your work.
Yeah, and well, it's just whatever. I'd started a company, and I kind of knew. So anyway, it all fit together. But we wrote a satire, and I didn't have any things with just my name on it. I had no credits, and I broke up with my writing partner right on the verge of tremendous wealth and success. I decided I would go it alone, and turned down a lot of money, and that was really stupid. Never do that again. But there was a guy at Fox who was an executive, and I now had an agent, and they said, you should read the script 20 Billion. So he read it, and everyone loved it. Anyone who read it loved it, and it was a good script, I think, and really weird. We had Mike Myers at one point, Sidney Pollack producing, and we were going to get it made at Paramount. I sold it to Paramount, this huge spec sale, and Sherry Lansing and Sidney Pollack thought it was a love story, and it was satire. Like, we thought it was Dr. Strangelove, and they thought it was Out of Africa. And it's like there's not a lot of difference. Think of the gap between those movies. And so 37 rewrites for Paramount, and the movie still hasn't been made. And but anyway, script goes into a guy at Fox 2000 and named Alex Gartner, and he's like an executive vice president, and he reads it, and he's like, I love this, and they're like, you should meet Gaghan. And he's like, why? Michael Tolkien clearly wrote this. This is like the player, it's like a satire. It's very funny, and like, why would I meet this? No, they talked him into it. So I went in, now I'm getting to traffic and Edswick. So I go in there, and he says, like these guys do, but I'd never been asked this question in this way, but this is how they do it. They say, so, because they don't know what they're doing talking to you, and they just want to get you out of there as fast as they can. They give you a glass of water, a cup of coffee, and they just want you out. And they say, so, what do you want to do? I want to be a U.S. senator, but I'm here in your office. I have a little dog. He's at home. You're just like, I don't know. What do you want to do? You just don't know what to say. Like, it's such a weird question. What do you want to do? I'm like, I don't know. I wanted to be an architect when I watched the Brady Bunch a lot. So anyway, but I said, and then it's like, I fumbled that one. I got a 0. And he's like, well, what have you been thinking about? Like, what have I been thinking about? That is terrifying. And I said, weirdly, I'm thinking someone should do a movie about the war on drugs, because I think it's fucking preposterous. And it just makes me so angry, that alcohol's legal and pot isn't, and it seems so arbitrary. And I told him some stories, and he said, at the end of it, he said, really abstractly, and like in the Oracle, he said, we have a deal with a director who's thinking something sort of like this, sort of, I think. Maybe I can get you guys together. I don't know. We'll just see how it goes. I was like,
Stephen, how much did you know about when you say that it was maddening, how much did you know at that time about the war on drugs? Had you read about it, or was it just...
I had done about 15 years of amateur research.
But that's different than the war on drugs, isn't it? The actual war on drugs, but...
No, but what he's saying is so key, because it's like, this was going to his personal issues.
Right.
And
in fact, this is the weirdest coincidence. You guys are going to, as they know, because they were asking me, do you have notes and things you can bring in about traffic? And I was like, I kind of do, but I kind of don't. Like, I wrote it in this burst at one point, but I'll get to that, because it was really hard. It was so hard to get to that point, and then I wrote it really fast. But skipping ahead, but I actually found this. Weirdly, I had all these technology problems with my email, and I opened up a new beta version of Yahoo Mail today, and somehow in the sent folder, 13 emails popped up from 1999. I haven't seen them. I'm like, and one of them is exactly about the daughter story. It's a letter I wrote to Soderbergh explaining why I thought the miniseries sucked.
Can we even though you're not getting
I'll
it
read
tonight.
I'll read it. I have it here with me. So
Oh,
anyway,
awesome.
you'll flip
That
out.
is so bizarre because I asked him if he would bring in notes and a draft, and he's like, I was moving out and I don't know where they are. And so
No,
this is genuinely bizarre.
95% of it I threw out. I know exactly where it is. I put it all in a big garbage can,
Right.
and then I threw it out, which was stupid. But I just thought I never wanted to think about it again. It was
Right.
really dumb. Don't
It's
throw out your drafts. But I just
understandable,
yeah.
though.
And I don't like, I have all these awards. I don't even know where they are. I mean, it's so stupid. I found my Oscar the other day. It's rusting. I was like, fuck. I live on the beach. There's all this salt water. You can't read my name anymore. It could be like Fred Zinnemann. It's like, what the hell is that? Like, yeah, I directed, Bold and the Beautiful. I don't know. Anyway,
So
From Here
I
to Eternity,
interrupted you.
Steve
You were-
Gaghan. But
So you were saying that
Okay,
he
so-
said, there's this director, I want to get you two together.
and there's just like a million good lessons in this that I'll try to track through really quickly because I'm being a little scattered. The director was Ed Zwick, and I knew a little bit of his work. We got together. I told him what I was thinking about the war on drugs, and I had a pretty good idea of how I wanted to do it. And he said, well, I was thinking it should be a satire. I'm like, that's a better idea. Because if anybody wants to do a satire, I'm down for it. They don't get made, but they're totally fun. And so he said, there's just this crazy, because I have this one newspaper clipping about this article, this thing that happened where, 3 different law enforcement agencies were all busting like the same guy who was an undercover guy. So you had the DEA and then like the FBI and local law enforcement, and they all pull guns. They're all about to shoot each other because none of them realize they're all undercover, and they're all trying to bust some guy who's got a bunch of pot in his trunk. And he goes, I just think that's absurd, and I think that's really funny. And I said, it's a clusterfuck of law enforcement zeal. And he said, exactly. And that line is actually in the script, in the exposition. And I'm an enormous believer in exposition, by the way.
What do you mean by that? I mean,
Well,
exposit on that, please.
yes, I will. I think that people underwrite and pay far too little attention to the non-dialogue parts of the script. And I would say very simply that as a writer, as a screenwriter, you have an absolute obligation to explain the last image of every scene and the first image of the next scene. The transition is your province. You control it completely. And great example of a transition, very famous one, is Lawrence of Arabia. Peter O'Toole's been burning out the match. Of course it hurts. The thing is that not let it bother you, whatever. And he goes into the office after he's gotten the job with Dryden, and he's looking at Dryden's art, and then he does the thing with the match again, and you think he's gonna, and he does it. He pulls it out, and then whoosh, the sun in the desert coming up. Now, that seems directorial, right? Wrong. That was written by Robert Bolt. He scripted it, and I think that we all have to, that's where the bar is set. And every transition, I mean, it's rare that I don't look at a transition in my own scripts and say, well, that's not as good as Bolt, and then I want to make it as good. And it's like, it's just lazy. What happens is you tend to write the dialogue, and then you kind of go, well, someone will figure it out. You don't really say it that way, but you're like, someone's going to come along and there's going to be a production designer and a director, and they'll figure out what's in the room and what the camera's looking at. I mean, there's a DP, for God's sake. But the fact is that in terms of dramatic art, that cut, particularly across scenes, I mean, cuts inside of scenes are just as important, but that cut from scene to scene, that transition is everything. And so that last sentence in a scene should be so vivid. What's the feeling we're leaving the scene with? What are we looking at? And then where you start that next scene, is it jarring? Is it lyrical? Is it abstract? What is it, But I'm really a stickler for that stuff. And so,
But Stephen, I'm sorry.
Anyway.
I keep interrupting you, but sometimes you hear that directors really don't want you to put.
bullshit.
Okay.
Bullshit.
Well,
It's a freebie. There's no director on earth that doesn't want to have a great visual, It's like, I'm sitting there working all day today. I had the worst day of writing in history. I realized that yet again, pages 20 to, I've written pages 20 to 40 of the script 40 times, and it still doesn't work. I'm like, I want to go crazy. But so much of it, and the reason it's not working, is you just look at it and you're like, this is just thin. And I mean, I was working with Friedkin once, Billy Friedkin, who's awesome. He's just really smart and crazy. And he says, actually very interesting, I turned in a draft of a script to Dick Zanuck. And It's 154 pages, and he's called me up Sunday morning, 9 a.m. He said, "Kid, it's genius. Get your passport ready. We're going to Yemen." I believed him, and that was a mistake. So I show up to meet with Billy, and Billy comes in like 15 minutes late, and he sits down, and within about 10 seconds, he's screaming at the top of his lungs. He's screaming, "War on trial. War's always on trial, but you want to make a $60 million movie for Hollywood, you better have a goddamn antagonist. And at the end of the movie, in the third act, the goddamn antagonist goes down, and the fucking audience comes out of their seat like monkeys, and they clap like this." Okay. That was like minute one. 2 hours later, he stopped, never dropping from that volume. It was like the Memorex, where you're just blown back in the chair. In my head, I just hear this. I turn bright red. I just hear, "I quit, I quit, I quit, I quit." That's all I hear in my head. I quit, I quit, I quit, I quit. And that's really related to Traffic too, because that line, "War on trial, war's always on trial." And I did that movie for them at Paramount because I wanted to get a movie made, and I was really frustrated. And Rules of Engagement got made, and it got ruined. And I came out of that experience and I said, "Well, fuck you. I'm going to put war on trial, and I'm going to put it on trial. I'm going to show you you're wrong." And that was a huge motivator for me. And so I'm sitting with Ed Zwick.
This is twice now. I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is twice now that you've talked about the jumping off place for you has been getting really pissed off. And I think that's so important. I mean,
yeah, whatever works.
just think it's interesting.
Yeah,
Okay, go
I
ahead.
mean, I've had a lot of systems for writing, and most of them are very unhealthy. But anyway, I'm sitting with Ed, and he says he wants to do a satire, and I was like, great. So he talked about it. We got really excited, and Ed's become a very good friend of mine. He's a good friend of yours, and I know him super well now. But I went off to try to write. I got a scale deal at Fox 2000, and they took a chance that I could write this movie. And then I got to go to Washington to do research, and that was probably the career changer for me. Didn't happen easily, but I finally went to Washington, and I actually got a notebook, and I went around and I talked to people that knew what they were talking about, and I wrote down what they said. And some of what they said, at first I didn't really know how to ask questions, and I didn't know what was important, but I got lucky, and I started meeting people who were just so vivid and so good that a monkey would have known to just like, oh my God, and I know Frank Pearson pretty well, and one day he said to me, he goes, isn't it amazing that the lines, it was when those billboards were up, and his quotes were on these billboards, and he goes, every great line that I get credit for, somebody said. Every one. It's unbelievable. I get credit for it, and some guy said it. I'm like, I always think that. Like when I get stuck, I'm like, what's in the notebook? What do I have that gets me back to the real thing?
That scene with Michael Douglas and Jim Brolin, the scene about the two letters, was that something
Was that
that's
something someone said? The two letters.
Let's see. Yes, that's a relatively famous story.
But
that-
from your life or
No,
somebody?
that's probably the only thing in the movie that was a story Soderbergh knew, and I took it and I used it. But it's just to get to the point where Stephen even enters the picture is quite interesting, because what happened was I did all this research, I got all this information, and then I just couldn't figure it out. I knew it was important. I knew I wanted to do this movie, and I spent 8 or 9 months just having like a writer's block. I couldn't get it done, and it was so frustrating. And primarily it was because the scale of the movie, and I didn't realize this. Now I can say it like really simply, which is, you're writing about a system. Duh, use a multiple, protagonist, use multiple narrators. Then you can jump in at different points, and you have this cross-cutting. I mean, I'd probably written 25 hours of TV at that point, A story, B story, C story, D story. It's right in front of my nose. I'm like, why didn't I say to myself, multiple narrative? Why didn't I? I don't know, but I didn't. So I'm quietly having a nervous breakdown. I haven't checked in with Ed. I'm just hiding in my apartment. Every once in a while I bring over a smart friend and I dump like 300 pages of crap on him and go, what do I do? They're just like, I don't know, man, you're in trouble. And so out of the blue, I'd written this other script called Havoc, which was always like 3/4 of a good script. and it was a little bit about my own high school experience. And I was really wild in high school. Like I drank and did a lot of drugs, and I had a really good time, and I got kicked out, and anyway, all this stuff. So Soderbergh had read this, and he had, with Laura Bickford, the rights to remake this British miniseries, Traffic, with a K. And he had shopped it all over to every studio, and he couldn't get it set up. And no one would bite, because there was this conventional wisdom. Drug movies don't make money. Nobody makes drug movies, and that's it, end of story. And so everybody says that. And I am utterly convinced that whenever you hear people saying, it's like Rockefeller's shoeshine boy, says, hey, my investments are doing pretty well. You ought to look at that Standard Oil. It's a good investment. And he got out of the stock market. And it's like any time conventional wisdom is telling you something, go the opposite. I'm so sure of it. It's just, right before they greenlit Syriana, I sat in the room with Alan Horn. He's just like, this is just like, guys in rooms talking. It's like, just don't lose us a lot of money, please. Just, my friend Wes Anderson had said to me one time this great thing. I said, I'm writing an unmakeable movie. And he said, isn't that the point? Write an unmakeable movie, but write it well enough they have to make it. I mean, isn't that it?
That's a great quote.
Yeah, Wes is a really smart guy. But anyway, so I'm back to having a nervous breakdown. Soderbergh, we go to lunch at, what's that place on? It's like Doheny and Wilshire, with the boxers. The Michael Mann
Kate
shop.
Mantilini.
Yeah, Kate Mantilini. So we're
Do
sitting
I
there.
get anything for that?
Yeah, Cobb salads. And he says, I've got this miniseries. And I said, I'm already doing a movie on the war on drugs. I'm like a year into it. I owe Ed a script. And he said, well, just take a look at the miniseries anyway, please. You might like it, whatever, watch it. I'm like really skeptical. Miniseries, okay, I'll watch it. I'm trying to put it on, and like within like the first time it switched storylines, like the light bulb went off over my head, and I called up Soderbergh and I was like, listen, I feel really badly because I'm gonna steal your idea. I'm stealing it. I've been suffering with this now for like a year and a half. I mean, a year and a half, nothing's happening, and I gotta just multiple narrative, dude. I mean, I have an Emmy. I have a right to that multiple narrative. And I said, but what we could try to do is we could see if Ed would be willing to produce. And because I love Soderbergh as a director, and I thought Ed might do it. So I called up Ed, and I had to ask him if he would be willing to produce for Stephen directing, which is a really hard call to make because directors have big egos a lot of times. And when you just have not a pot to piss in, and you're like going, oh man, is this really inappropriate? And Zwick is so funny. He's like, well, it's not like I've seen a script. I mean, like, what am I, like, I'm like so much older than when I met you, and like, who cares? I mean, if that'll help you, great. Get, fucking Orson Welles to do it. I don't care. I'm like, thank you, I think. Thank you. That sounds great. Orson, So, and then, now.
But that was your answer. I mean, that was the thing that made it possible for you to go forward.
And then I didn't. So you would think I would have, because they were all so nice. And yet, and again, nothing happened.
Because you were
What do you mean nothing happened?
Because you were still blocked?
I couldn't do it. Like, I just couldn't write it, I would sit down and I would write. I couldn't base it on the miniseries, I didn't like it. Like, I recognized what he did, and I thought it was interesting because he wrote about this system, and he was about heroin. He had heroin growers, and then he had London, and he had an addict, and I thought, oh, that's so interesting. But the stories, in my opinion, tended to be slightly melodramatic.
I couldn't get into it. I tried to watch it actually after I saw Traffic the first time because I was curious, and I just couldn't get into it.
Most people love it, and and it's perfectly great, but. And it's something I can talk about at length because I think it actually illustrates two totally diametrically opposed philosophies of writing that have existed throughout time. And
what are they?
Well, for lack of a better way of putting it, one is Shakespearean, and one is Tolstoyan, or one is Chekhovian, and one is Haggissian.
And you're like Chekhovian.
I don't know what no, I'm kidding. I don't know.
No, I mean, which one are you?
Well, I think that things don't have clear beginnings and clear endings. And I just think life is arbitrary, and you pick up in the middle of things and you don't know why, and then you wander away from them and you're not quite sure why.
So
And
you like that messiness.
I like things that feel like my life, you know, that I understand. And so I also like thrills and I like big turns and twists and everything, but
the subject matters you're picking also have,
delicate.
you can't, it would feel so false if it was wrapped up at the end, because in
It's too big.
I
in
can talk about
Traffic
the-
and Syriana, they're not
That's at length, yeah.
they're not resolvable problems. I mean, that was what was so interesting about.
It's a very, you know, there's a famous story, it's a wonderful story, where Chekhov is dying of tuberculosis. Chekhov is just one of the great people of all time. And he,
You know Chekhov too?
Chekhov goes down to,
He was with him at Cape Manalini. And
Chekhov goes down to meet Tolstoy. And he worships Tolstoy. Tolstoy's like 80, and they're at Yalta. Chekhov has TB, he's dying. And he admires Tolstoy. You know, Tolstoy's like a joke, but he's also as famous as like Elvis and Muhammad Ali combined or something. And so, and he'd stopped a famine in the country, and anyway, and he's sitting with him, and Tolstoy says, you have 6 first-rank stories, 6 second-rank stories, and the rest I don't want to talk about. Chekhov's like, but Count, what about the plays? What about my plays? And he says, at least you're not as bad as that Shakespeare guy. And anyway, it's funny, because he thought, it's like ridiculous, Tolstoy putting down Shakespeare. I mean, just, come on, what are we talking about? Let's get back to reality here. I'll get back to the life of failing at writing Traffic, which I had this, it felt important to me personally, and I put a lot of pressure on myself, so I just couldn't do anything that felt good enough, and I was really freaking out. And it was all fragile in my mind, you know, psychologically, just because at that point I had just barely stopped my daily consumption of, you know, whatever I'd been doing, and I was just really floundering, and months and months and months and months went by, and so meanwhile, Soderbergh's now going off. He had been sort of in a career trough, and he's now he's the 35th director they went to for Aaron Brockovich, and he's getting ready to go make Aaron Brockovich. And he's just busy. He's like the greatest guy on earth. He's like this forward motion machine. He is unconflicted. He just gets up and does it, and then he stops, and he does it again, and like, I mean, you've never seen anything like it. It's really, really frustrating to observe close at hand. And so I finally just, it was like the best thing that ever happened to me, and this is the key, is I finally just went, I was just like, oh man, I gotta tell him the truth, you know, because I'm meeting with him once a week at the Daily Grill near his apartment. And every week, we just sit down and we'd order blackened swordfish and with mashed potatoes. And he would go, how's it going? I'd be like, great, it's going great. God, it was great, just great. And then we'd eat and talk about other stuff.
Yeah, one of the things I say is, yeah, I'm working on some things in the outline, but it is really good. It's getting so much better.
That was right there. That's what I kept saying. And finally, I mean, months.
Oh, it just makes my stomach.
I know,
turn
it just
over.
kills you. You just think about it. I go, oh my God. And like, finally, I went over to, I called him, like, I've got to see you. It's like Sunday at like 11:45 a.m. He's like, what's wrong? Is everything okay? I'm like, yeah, everything's fine. I had to come talk to you. Drive over to his apartment. He has his apartment just basically books stacked on the floor, no furniture, one TV. And I sit there and I'm like in the chair, and he's looking, it's just like this, like on a, you know, bright day and off sweet cert. He's like, what? I'm like, I haven't done anything. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, I just keep trying. I'm about to do it, and I just don't. I don't know what's wrong with me. And he goes, well, I've got a one-liner around here somewhere. Hold on. And he pulls out this one-liner he's got of the miniseries. He gets a stack of note cards, and he goes, and he like starts scribbling, you know, one with a red red pen, green pen, blue pen, lays them out. He's no furniture. He's got this huge floor, so he just like lays them all out. Takes about 45 minutes. He goes, and he stacks them together, puts a rubber band around them, gives them to me, and says, you know, maybe that'll help. And I was like, I never forget how I felt in the car. When I got in the car out in front of his apartment, I sat there and I had those cards, and I was just like, on the one hand, I was so relieved he didn't yell at me, you know, because I just thought he was going to go, "You're such a phony, and I'm firing you," you know, because it's like he's, you know. So I was grateful on the one hand. On the other hand, I felt like such a failure. I just was sitting there going, "You are so pathetic, Gaghan. God damn it." So anyway, I go back to my place, and I put all these up on a bulletin board, and I look at them, and I'm just jubilant, because now I'm going to write. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? I don't even know what this is. This isn't a movie. This is like, I can't, what the hell? He fooled, this is nothing. So, and then like some time goes by, maybe another week, and I wake up in the middle of the night, like 4 a.m., and now I've been now thinking about this every day, all day, for 2 years, at least. Plus the 15 years of the research I did on the amateur basis, going back to the age of 13.
Did you ever think about just, I gotta quit this thing?
Everyone told me to quit. I mean, like, my closest advisors, my agent, these people are just barely working with me. They're like, wow, we've really got a crazy person. Oh my God, why do we have... You should quit. You know, I mean, people I trusted, you know, really, I went to, like, I think Milch told me to quit, and Bob Ward, and like everyone was just like, just don't do it. And they also said in the macro sense, Gaghan, if it's this hard, you should find another career, you know? And, you know,
See, that's a big one for me, because it's that hard for me. I mean,
I don't know how. I don't trust, I don't understand.
hard
It's
for me.
easy. I don't know.
I mean, if I would quit on the basis of it's really hard and I feel like a failure,
I would have quit today.
never would have.
I should have quit today.
Yeah.
I mean, I could prove in a court of law I should not be writing. I could prove it. I mean, I can prove it. You just can't believe how
Right.
bad, and you're just like, well, how did I ever do it before?
Right. That's the big one.
I have no idea. I'll read you this email in a little bit about this Caroline storyline, and it looks like a message from, like, in cuneiform from a lost civilization to me, because I'm like, that is really smart. Wow, I knew what I was talking about. Who was that person who wrote this in 1999? Jesus. But anyway, so this amazing thing happened, and this is, I think, is really important to talk about, because it's like, you guys, I'm sure, know this in your work. I woke up and I just had a voice in my head, you know, and a voice said, it was a really specific, weird voice, because it was a middle-aged woman, and it was in my head, and it said, "Duck salad? You never eat duck salad." "Why, I know I don't, but I do now." Like, what is that? So I sat up straight in bed, like, it was just, I heard it in my head, like someone was in the room, and like I woke up and someone's in the room. I had someone in bed with me who was like, what, is someone in the house? Oh my God, what happened? I'm like, no, I heard a voice. What do you mean you heard a voice? Like, I heard a voice. What did it say? It said, "Duck salad. You never eat duck salad." There's like this pause. And she said to me, she said a famous, great quote. She said, "You're a writer. Do you think you should get up and write it down?" My God, you're right. I should. That's exactly what I should do. So I got up and I went to my desk, which was as far as you are from me, in my room, and I quietly turned on my computer, and 6 weeks later I had a 165-page draft of Traffic.
And she says that in that opening restaurant scene. Catherine Zeta-Jones
It's
says
just
it.
exactly what it was, and it's
No, someone says it to her.
yeah,
right?
but it's her character, and what it was. I realized that because I grew up in this kind of middle-class background in Kentucky, and I knew this world really well, and I had a lot of these, chemical dependency issues at the same time, and I knew my mother very well, obviously, and I thought, this is so interesting, what if it's just like a country club mom? That's what my mom was. She was a country club mom, and I thought, what if, oh yeah, and so then suddenly, and I knew, believe it or not, I knew Ivan Boesky. And Ivan Boesky, I knew his daughter, who's an art dealer now, and she dated a friend of mine. And I'd been down to his house in North of La Jolla in this neighborhood, and it's this really weird neighborhood where all these kind of, it's like there's a lot of money, but it's also really sketchy and private and kind of just felt weird. And I thought, oh man, that's what I'm doing. I'm putting this voice in a woman who lives in that neighborhood, and I just went off to the races. And
Can I? One of the things that just made me think of is sometimes I'm so stuck on the idea of what I'm doing that you just get stuck there. And in a way, that duck salad thing was, this is what it sounds like to eavesdrop on these people. This is what real people would say, because you don't want a scene where everybody's just talking about drugs. And so I can really see how something that weird, because it was probably all there stored up, ready to go, if once you could hear the characters.
an enormous amount of pressure, just building up and building up and building up. And it's like, don't quit before the miracle, you know, just don't quit before the miracle, because it just needed that little thing that let all that force out in one direction. And same thing happened on SYRIANA. You know, I did all this incredible research, and I was writing all these pages, and it was all dead and lifeless.
And that must be really fun after you've won an Oscar for writing.
Oh my God, you just sit there and you don't think about that. You just think, what is, you know, you just think people are counting. I always just think people are counting on me. You know, they've hired me, and they believe, you know, they've given me a break, and I just don't want to let them down. You know, I don't want to let myself down, but I just want to do something good, you know, and I don't know how to do it, and it's just, there's no, and I had the exact same thing, and I had this storyline that got cut out of SYRIANA about a Miss America winner, and then she went to Miss Universe and got third, and then at that moment, a madam came up to her and said, I want to introduce you to somebody, and then they made this offer of $4 million, and for a year, and you'll never have to worry again. You don't have to, you know, open any tire stores. So I had this scene at the backstage at the Miss Universe pageant, and it was terrible. And I was talking to the same person who had said to me, "Why don't you write it down?" And I read her the scene, and I thought it was so good. And she was like, "Steve, you know how those girls talk. I mean, come on, they talk like, you know, they talk like this." And she said this one line, and I was like, oh my God, that's how they talk. And I just, again, launched into it, you know. And but with Traffic, it was different, you know, in that SYRIANA, it started from a place of being, at that point, a professional screenwriter, you know, and I was like, I can bring craft to it. I kind of knew what I was doing at that point. With Traffic, I didn't really know what I was doing yet. And so I just had this kind of passion, you know, to tell something really clearly. And I wanted the scenes to be true, you know, just true. I wanted them to feel true, you know. I didn't want any bullshit.
So, Stephen, did you have, at what point did you know, you knew you were going to do multiple stories, you heard Duck Salad, but at what point did you know who was in the different stories?
Well, see, it was an incredible, you know, once I saw that multiple narrative idea, I just was like, oh my God, because I had this guy time traveling, you know. I had him just all over the place. I was going to have a drug czar, and not that his daughter was an addict or anything, but I had this, and you know, sort of a guy like Michael Douglas. Then I had done all this research on Mexico, so I had a ton of information about drug flow through Mexico, and also a lot about Colombia. I knew a lot about cartels in Colombia, a lot about cartels in Mexico, and I didn't quite know how it was all going to fit together. I saw Traffic, and I thought, oh, this is really good. There's, you know, I like the story of kind of the Matahari, you know, the woman who takes over for her husband. I like the idea of having a drug addict daughter, and I really like the idea of having a drug czar. Then I got in an enormous argument with Soderbergh for a long period of time, who he kept thinking, I mean, right up until, I mean, a month before shooting, he wanted not to be the drug czar, but a college professor who was doing a white paper report on the war on drugs. And he finally it didn't work. But, you know, I'll read you. This is actually really interesting. I'll read you this.
It still blows my mind that you found that today.
I'm
That
telling
is
you, not
so
only, like,
bizarre.
I
It's
found it by
the
not-
notes genie
by not looking.
delivering it.
I mean,
Wow.
I was just, my hard drive crashed last week on my laptop, and I punched my computer. So don't cry for me, not Argentina. I actually hit the keyboard with my fist and lost 4 years of work. But nonetheless, it was. I hope that by the end of this night, none of you will want to keep writing anymore. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. It's really strange, though. I mean, this is truly the weirdest thing I've ever seen. I still don't know why they popped up. Oops, cancel.
It's like the Dead Sea Scrolls there.
It's the weirdest thing. I look back and I'm
He's
like,
just texting his friends.
Steven Soderbergh, 7/11/1999. I'm like, what is this doing on here? When do you get email? 1999. It's like weirdest thing ever. Okay, so I will read this to you.
So Soderbergh wrote this to you?
No, I wrote this to Steven. And this is just to give you I think a lot of insight how that works. Stephen, I have problems with Carolyn's story. That's the daughter. It's the traffic arc, including locking her in her room? Question mark. Is that realistic? Isn't it better to see her problem develop without the parents really knowing what's going on? The way it works in traffic is all high points. Traffic with a K. Plot points without much of the interstitial work that makes for psychological reality. I'm concerned this will feel like a survey course. I don't buy any of the traffic stuff about the friend ODing and it causing some big hullabaloo. This isn't how it works in America. It would be a big tragedy among the school kids, their first funeral, everyone grieving and denying they had any idea what was going on. It would prompt discussions at school, PTA get-togethers, hand-wringing. Every kid would say, I knew she smoked a little pot. He hung out with the hippie crowd, but I had no idea they were into heroin. Also, this is a heroin plot point, and we're taking Carolyn down. That was my wife actually writing me. Also, this is a heroin plot point, and we're taking Carolyn down a coke path, I thought. I love that, the coke path. Anyway, if we have a death happen, it's better to have the kids dump the body at the hospital than flee. Carolyn's folks try to talk to her about it, and she mourns with her parents, but the gist is this could never happen to anyone in her crowd. I like her getting arrested on possession charges or buying in a bad part of town. This is actually a crime and is more common. I like watching her wiggle out of the obvious complications and her dad calling in some favors. In other words, a slower ramp up to her problem, more living in denial for the parents than all that you're locked in your until further notice stuff. They could find a crack pipe or heroin needle and toss her in rehab. She could escape. Or is it better to save this for the end? Instead of her saying, I only tried it once. Then her parents ground her and she leaves. If she steals from Granny in hospital, question mark, it should be early while we're still learning of her problem and still has the ability to shock. What do you think?
Wow. That's your entire, that's just amazing.
That guy in 99, he was like, who is this guy? I was like looking at this going,
But it's amazing because
an aneurysm.
you probably felt totally incompetent when you wrote that. Like, why don't I know this stuff?
And it was just like, and then when I got into that
It's
storyline, I was
amazing.
like, oh my God, that write what you know, is really.
Yeah, because it sounds very real, like somebody who knows how the kids, how kids lie to your parents and how that slippery slope. That was heartbreaking. That story.
That scene where every scene really with her was.
And that actress was so good because she was so innocent. She wasn't.
She was great, Erica Christensen.
Yeah.
But that scene where she's getting booked, and we first, that's when we really hear what an exemplary life she's leading.
And the great.
That blew me away.
I know, and that's like, talk about freebies. That is verbatim my high school resume, and that lady. Is exactly the social worker I had to talk. Exactly. That is the social worker I talked to.
No way.
Oh yeah. No, it's not her. But it's an actress. It's an actress. Portraying.
I'm so naive.
No, but
I thought you meant like.
Well,
you
he
got
said
the lady.
exactly it was her. I don't know how naive you are.
No, but she
no.
did such a great. That actress just
that was
nailed
amazing.
it. But I didn't know that scene was going to be in the movie. But that happened to me when I was 17. And I'll never forget it. It was a great story. It was really funny. I was doing a favor for someone. Totally true. I had not been drinking. These friends of mine were throwing up, and I said, you guys should stay at my house. You can sleep in the basement. Go home. Driving the guy home, he starts to throw up in my car. I pull over. This policeman pulls up, who knows me. He looks at me and he says, your eyes are kind of red. I said, I have allergies. Yeah, that's the wrong answer. So he ransacked my car and he found a fake ID forged instrument in the third degree, like some pot seeds in the ashtray. Oh, obsession of marijuana. And under all this like athletic crap in the trunk, like some old, really cheap gin. I'm like, God. So I get arrested and, you know, I'm in juvenile jail, which is hilarious. And I'm not that repentant, as you might. And I just, they left me there for a long time, you know, like 18 hours. And I, totally on purpose to teach me a lesson, which I was totally aware of. And I got out and I met this, you know, this social worker. And I was just exactly that attitude you hear in my voice. I was so stubborn and so sure this lady was full of shit and that I had all the answers and I was wrong and I was doing a favor for these guys who were drunk and I hadn't been drinking and blah, 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 blah. And she just looked at me and she's like, you know, she's got all this stuff I filled out in front of her and she just looks up and she's like, you want to tell me what you're doing in here? Right. And I was 17 and it really got through to me. Now, I didn't clean up my act for 15 more years. But when I did, that scene was like one of those touchstone scenes I wrote about because it was just, man, she really...
It was the duck salad of your drug use.
No, she was a good, she totally had me dead to rights and she was a good person and she really...
She saw you.
Just was clear. She was like, and I never forget that. She was just like, what's Meals on Wheels? And I'm like, I deliver
love
food.
That.
I deliver food to old people 3 days a week.
Meals on Wheels.
She's like, what?
That's just.
It was like a
that was killer.
It's so funny, you know. But so that's the personal stuff, and then there was all this other stuff, which is very research based. You know, sort of what was going on in the world of drugs, and I got very lucky in that too. You know, if you read everything you can get your hands on, you know, you'll make your own luck. And I ran across an essay by Lewis Lapham in Harper's Magazine, and he had this amazing quote. He said, "Molecules don't have morality. Molecules don't have morality." And I just went, exactly. So, you know, my script, I had people popping Sudafed to stay awake. Everyone's smoking cigarettes. They're eating Nicorette. They have patches on. Everybody drinks. You know, it's just everywhere.
Well, that was also what I remember the shock and kind of confusion that I had tracking the Benicio del Toro character, because I kept not being able to figure out, was he a good guy? Was he a bad guy? Was he on the take? And then the scene was so moving at the end when he's at the baseball field, but it was also like, boy, it's just not black and white. This is such a huge gray area movie.
And this is a great point to bring up, because his character was much more black and white originally. In that draft I wrote, in that 165-page just sort of burst, he was a bad guy, and he was corrupt. And I'd spent time in Tijuana, and I'd met the chief of police, and I spent a lot of, I hung out with him. I thought he was a great guy, and he said this great line to me. He said, we're at a diner. He's like, the average life expectancy of an honest cop in Tijuana, it's 6 weeks. I'm like, how long have you been a cop? He's like, 18 years. I was like,
wow.
It's like, this is important.
Yeah.
And so I had that information about Tijuana, which is, that's when it's not what they're telling you exactly, but it's just like, holy shit, this really matters. I had written him like that, and it was too black and white. But it's interesting because it worked fine, and yet it could have been better, right? And so then I finished the draft, and they have this guy they've brought on as a consultant who knew a lot about Mexico, who'd shared part of a Pulitzer for the New York Times, named Tim Golden. And he comes with us. We go on a trip back to Tijuana. Soderbergh decides that he wants to come see it for like 2 days. So he comes down, and this guy Tim Golden's there, and I don't really hit it off with him, let's say. And I'm just listening to him, and I'm like, it's just hilarious. I mean, the difference between journalism and drama is like, it's just like night and day, and you both are incredibly great things to do, but if you have that journalism brain kind of going, it's not going to translate exactly. And so, but he said something amazing. He said he had loved Tijuana, and he gave this kind of weird, impassioned thing about how Tijuana had been actually ruined by the drug traffic. Like he said, you don't realize, but there didn't used to be crack whores, and there didn't used to be this, and there didn't used to be that. It wasn't like this. It's changed, and then that's the drugs coming into America, and people snorting blow in America have destroyed Tijuana. Sort of is what he was, kind of saying in this roundabout way. And I thought about that, and then it's like how things happen. You sit down, and I kind of just one day this speech about the baseball. Everybody loves baseball. Popped into my head, and I just thought about lighted baseball fields. Getting baseball fields for kids, which I thought would be like something that police chief would talk about, and his altruism would take the form of we're going to save the children. I am a corrupt police officer, but I will save the children. And so I went back and I worked on it, and with traffic particularly, I was really benefited, at the very end. We benefited two ways. One, nobody would make the movie. I turned it in to the studio. They didn't call me back. And finally I called them, and I just was like, did you get the script? It's like, yeah, I got it. That's it. Dead silent. And I'm like, what'd you think of it? And the answer was, it's kind of long. Like, well, it's long, but what about the content?
It's about drugs.
And the answer was, I can't remember the other guy's name. Bill and Bob get back on Tuesday. Never forget that. It wasn't Bob, it was Bill, and it was Bill Mechanic and somebody else, and they were like, basically it was like, my bosses get back on Tuesday, I'm not talking about this, goodbye. And
Because they don't know what they think of it till they're
no, and it's just, whatever.
tells them.
Drug movies don't make money. It's a, bad idea. It
Well,
has,
there's not clear
it has
good
underrated.
guys and bad guys, and it's not all wrapped up. I mean, it had
It made you
everything going
think.
against it.
It made you think. It made you ask questions. It made you be confused about certain things. It made you have to work. I mean, I think both of those movies, Traffic and Syriana, which to me are almost like a pair on some level, oddly enough.
I'd say, because I noticed when I was talking about just craft, I noticed everybody got sort of, were paying more attention. And I want to say something specific about the craft of the script. At the very end of the process, the movie was benefited because we didn't have a studio. And Soderbergh just kept saying, I'm making the movie in April, starting April 1st. Everyone's like, you're crazy. You don't have a budget. You don't have a star. You don't have any money. I'm making it April 1st. I don't care. At the last minute, he got Michael Douglas, and we thought we had Harrison Ford with this, that, and the other thing. And then, so finally, we have a studio, USA, and it's 3 weeks until he's going to start. And there's just no time to give notes. There's no interference. There's nobody. There's no one to say anything. No one could even get up to speed. How are you going to get up to speed on something that we've been working on for 2.5 years and say something? They just didn't say anything. They were just like, good luck. And so that's an enormous lucky break. I've been really helped by executives at times, but on something complicated that's its own thing, it's just no one's going to understand it. You just have to.
Well, and I'm sure it helped too. I'm sorry, but that by then, Aaron Brockovich had come out, right? So now the guy who was number 35 on a list was somebody that they thought knew something. So it's like, well, I don't get it, but maybe he does, or
exactly. And but we went and locked ourselves up in a hotel room for 2 days. Stephen and I, and Stephen taught me something unbelievably great. A lot of when I talk about transitions, a lot of it is stuff. It's his insights, but he just relentlessly, scene by scene. I realized we were starting every scene later and we were ending earlier, and he was butting things together that weren't at first clear that they should be butted together. And just by lopping off like this much of every scene and about that much at the head of every scene, the movie got 50% better. And it's not rocket science. And I in my mind, I was like, wow, I'm doing a transitions pass on everything I write from now on. And I do, and it's like totally mechanical, and the thing I'm working on now, I'm not there yet, but when I get past page 40, and I get to the end, and I go, I put the title on it, the next thing I'll do is I'll go and I'll do a transitions pass, and I'll just look, and I'll just try to make sure that every transition is as good as I can make it.
You
And
know,
it's-
the one movie that I actually directed, I did a TV movie, and I was so nervous because I'd never directed before. And even though I'd been on the set for TV shows, I was still like, oh my God, you know, how do I know? How do I know how to end the scene? And what I did was I went through and I wrote every transition because I figured, well, if I knew the transition and what my last shot and my first shot could be, then I could figure everything else out. So it really forced me to do exactly what you're talking about.
It's encoded in the DNA of the art form, to put it in a fancy, like 10-cent way. It's, you know, you're cutting 24 frames a second, and you're putting like a frame next to each other, and the brain plays this weird trick that like it assembles a moving image that isn't really there. It's just a bunch of still images, cut, 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 cut. And so it's like, it's this really basic level. It's like, what image is going to go next to the next image? And, you know, that's why I always say about exposition. And I get asked a lot of times, you know, I read a lot of scripts for friends, and some of my friends are trying to get their, you know, get in the WGA. And some of my friends are now, you know, have like Oscars and stuff. And so I always read scripts, and I'm like, I'm happy to, but you gotta let me be honest, you know, which when anyone says to you, they don't mean it, including me. But, you know, the thing I notice is people get more and more successful. They get lazier and lazier about writing that exposition. You'll just notice that dialogue starts to become like a racing stripe down the center of the page. And even like, you know, I really went and studied the script for There Will Be Blood. I was looking at it really carefully because I think there's just awesome stuff in it, and I think Paul's a really great writer. And I just, you know, I got the script and I wanted to just break it down and look at it, and it's amazing to me, like the confidence that he has, you know, because he just knows exactly what he's going to do with it, and it's not there on the page exactly, but what he does at such a heightened level is he's a master of subtext, and so. I'm totally convinced that the most important thing in a script is that thing, as much as I'm talking about exposition, the whole point of the exposition is to actually leave that space. It's like the space in between the cut of the frames where the brain, like impressionistic art, you know, if you go really close to a pointillistic picture, it's just points, and you pull back and suddenly it becomes something. The human is wired to fill in those gaps, you know, whatever, the visual, emotional circuitry fills them in. And in really good screenwriting, it's negative space. It's what's not there. I'm sure of it, and I think I know why. You know, I mean, I could be wrong, but it's actor bait.
Yeah. She talks about, I mean, we both do. Does everybody know what we mean by subtext, or do you? Yeah? Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. What I mean by it is that there's text in any scene. There's like, you know, she's been sleeping with my wife, and I'm like really angry, so I'm gonna get you. And then there's kind of this pause where, you know, the violence has happened or whatever, and now we're sitting there, and maybe the line on the script would be, Steve nervously tied his shoe. You know, I don't know, it could be anything. It just, I look, you know, you give a direction to the actor that gives you an insight into the emotional life that has not been stated. It's
Well,
not
you
in
know,
the text. It's beneath the text. It's what's simmering beneath the surface, and it's this enormous engine, and it's there, and you should never see it. You can hear it. You can feel it. If you write it too much, in other words, if you narrate the emotions in the text and the exposition, it's a disaster. And I'll tell you why it's a disaster. Because actors are really smart about this stuff. Just in practical terms, you've got to bait the hook with a shiny piece of actor bait. And they're swimming after it, and they're like, oh, and then they get up close, and it says, he was really sad, and he pounded his fists on the blackboard. And they just go, oh, and they swim away to some other little hook. And you're like, why didn't that movie get made that I worked on for 37 drafts, you know? And
Well, it also, I mean, another way that I
hate
think
to
about
demystify it.
subtext is, what'd you say?
I hate to demystify
I hate to
it.
demystify it because it is a magical art form.
Well, it's a mystical art form at any rate. But another way to look at subtext too is, I'm sleeping with his wife. You know, that's established, and the audience knows that because I've confided that into somebody. And the audience also knows that he knows it because someone else says he's found out. He's seen the credit card receipts. And then we run into each other in the line at the bank, right? And then he's like, oh, hi. Hi. And it's like the most banal thing on the page. But what it does is the actors fill in the emotion that isn't in the dialogue. In fact, it's exactly what's left out of the dialogue.
And it's exactly what they live for.
It's what they live for, but beyond that, what it does is if you know, even just look in your own life, if you're somewhere and someone is telling you a story and they're crying and they're feeling sorry for themselves, at some point you're just like, oh, shut up. But if the person isn't saying everything and you see that they're feeling it, but almost like they're trying not to express it, it gives you the space to feel for them. So it not only does something for the actor, but it creates a space for the audience to feel an emotion rather than, it's one of the reasons so many of these formulaic movies, I literally am like, I'm gonna go get popcorn and then I'm going to eat some of it in the lobby and then I'll go to the bathroom and I'll return my calls because they're so leading you to feel things and you just wind up feeling dead and numb.
Well, it's like someone pushing something in your face as opposed to
Over-explaining it.
doing something that would make you lean forward and want
And
to
in
be
practical,
closer.
and I think, and you guys just tell me if you, I mean, I think in practical terms, like in dramaturgy, when you have a scene, I'm actually just thinking about this thing today that's really like hanging me up, and this is absolutely true. When the scene isn't working that you're working on, the problem with it is usually encoded in 5 scenes earlier, and it's usually in 3 places, and it's building up to that because of exactly what Robin was just saying. Because you don't have the credit card receipt, and you don't have the thing, and there isn't an inner life, and there's no interior life, and there's no subtext, there's nothing. You haven't dramatized anything to bring to this scene. So the problem isn't that this scene is just lifeless and dead of its own self. The problem is actually encoded in the dramaturgy that is leading you to that place. And you can't talk about subtext enough in what we do because scripts aren't just like, samples, and they're not just things that go in. For a long time, I was a master of unmade screenplays. I write movies, I put them in drawers, it's great. And every once in a while someone, says it's good. And then I do another one. And, after a while, it was like, if you want to get this thing made, actors have to say the lines. They have to want to say it. And there's like so many classic mistakes you make. Is like you think of an actor you want, whoever it is, and you think, because I loved him doing that thing, and then you kind of write that thing. And the thing is, they've already done that thing. And I'm convinced you just, you can be much, much, much more clever about it, which is, and it's kind of your job. It's our job is to be really clever about it, is to kind of know who we want, know how you haven't seen them, know what you think might interest them in a way, and then kind of
Got that stuff all the time.
try to get it, because it's not just that the scenes have to be good. Someone has to come along, and if, and just in practical terms, it's like, if it's a, $50 million movie or whatever, exactly kind of who it's going to have to, you start to triangulate and you see this narrowing path of what your possibilities are. And it's really, it's not vague, and I wrote a movie recently at Universal. I adapted this book by Malcolm Gladwell, Blink, and Blink is like this.
How did you adapt Blink?
I know.
Really?
I never do that again. It was a huge mistake, but it was really hard. And
Golly,
I wanted to. Malcolm was a friend of mine. I wanted to honor him and do this kind of stuff. And I just I had this great idea, and then I got into it, and I realized that it was a good idea, and it was beyond my talent or capacity or whatever. Like somebody could pull it off. You guys could pull it off, but I was just like, I can't.
No
Yeah.
way.
I can't do it.
No
And so
way.
I'll do it by next week.
Yeah,
Just tell me what it is.
But it was this idea. I had all these really strong
Scares me.
feelings about intuition, and
Right.
I wanted to dramatize them somehow. It just anyway didn't quite work, and I had to jettison all of that and come up with something that works. And the whole time I'm doing this, I had an actor attached to the main role, and he's really famous.
What are his initials?
LDC. Anyway.
LDC.
Leonardo DiCaprio.
Oh. That would take me
So-
a year to figure that out.
And
Thank you.
and I know, like, I know him really. I know him. I mean, I think he's a great guy. I think he's a great actor. Like, he's like really down to earth. He's a nice guy, and he's cool. And, and I really respect him. And I could feel the role as I was writing it. Just some internal warning bell was going off in my head, going, "You are diverging from what he's gonna play," and I just couldn't help it. Like, willfully, I just kept doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it, and then I was done. I was like, there, and sure enough, he's just like, I don't get it.
Can you be a little more specific about what it was when you were doing it? What was it specifically that made you think, oh, he's not going to do it?
I should have used an abstract example, because I don't want to talk about someone that I know so well. But
It's a little late for that.
yeah, but you just
You can switch.
Switch to an abstract.
yeah, no, I just I'm trying to come up with a way to explain it that's accurate and not doesn't sound silly or something. I mean, in the most basic sense, I made the main character an entitled person. They're entitled, and I thought this was very interesting to write about today. Because Blink the book is about this idea of like trust your intuition, usually, except when you shouldn't. And the more you examine the book and really analyze it, there's kind of like no there. It's like impossible. You keep going to something, and you're